This is the Real Life Blue Stories podcast with your host, Megan Hall. So, this is episode 6. And before this episode, I was chopping it up with my guests. Hey, this is what I do before my podcast. And I really like to get to know my guests and hey, make sure everything's good. It's a really small world, but a lot of you probably know this man that I'm about to introduce. This is Sarge, aka Mr. Sarge Sportz, aka Mr. Brian Bearfield. And a little note is I just realized that Sarge knows my father. He knows my
Right.
he knows my
Right.
dad. So Sarge is an alpha. My dad's an alpha. Crazy things going on. Crazy things happening here. But welcome to the podcast.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? How you doing?
I like it. I like it. I like the big personality. So if you don't know, Sarge covers the Astros, the Rockets, the Texans with the big Texas flavor and the cowboy hat to match. So I love it all. It's very nostalgic for me. I'm also from Texas originally, so I always
My
appreciate
country
the
cousin.
Cowboys hat.
Are you country cousin?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. That's what I always feel whenever I hear people from Texas or from Houston. I'm like, oh, cousin, what's up? So, all right, let's talk about run of shows. So, we're going to do the giddy up, which is basically how you got your start in sports media. So, a lot of what I like to do is find out what my guest stories are, hence the real life blue stories part. We're going to talk about 2023 NFL Combine, who impressed you, any fits for the Texans' biggest takeaways. I know I saw you furiously tweeting out videos and thoughts and analysis, so I want to get your thoughts there. And then we'll do the state of the Texans, what you think D'Amico Ryans will bring to the team from your lens. The last part is called Blue Light Special. Guests get to ask me questions, sports related or not. All I ask is that you keep it respectful. And we usually get some really good questions, some really fun ones. So I'm looking forward to whatever you got for me. All right. So let's start with the giddy up. How did you get your start in sports media? Let's talk about it.
So I want to say in 2015, I retired. I got medically retired from the military. And during that time, my late wife was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. So that was one of the reasons why I got out of the military. I took a medical retirement. They were about to send me to Korea, but they weren't going to send her with me. And so I needed to be there with her because I didn't want her to go through colon cancer along. And side note, hey, this month is colon cancer awareness month, so make sure you get your butts checked, everybody, because colon cancer is 95% preventable. But
Mm-hmm.
when I got out of the military, so I was a huge sports fan. My wife was a huge sports fan, and I was working. I got back into the educational field, and someone said, "Hey, man, you ever thought about doing sports?" And I was like, maybe, maybe not. So I got on with this sports group, and my very first event was I had to attend 2 college football games, and both games I held the camera and packed the
Okay.
equipment. And so I wasn't the star. I wasn't, in front. Nobody wanted my input. Nobody wanted anything. The only thing I was there to do was to hold the camera at those locations. And so it wasn't really bad because I got a chance. I had never been to AT&T Stadium before, so I actually seen it was the game where it was Patrick Mahomes' last season, and they played Baylor. So it was Texas Tech versus Baylor, and I said, "Hey, look, if this is one of the perks of working in sports, then I love it." And because I've always been a sports fan, I'm a die-hard Dallas Cowboys fan. Have been one since I was knee high to a duck butt. So I have always rooted for the Dallas Cowboys. I love basketball. I love watching baseball, but football is my thing. And so I was with the sports group that had a sports show every Saturday, and it was the equivalent to double dutching. It was 8 of
Mm.
us in a studio, all trying, we're sharing mics and everybody's trying to get their opinions out, and you only have 2 hours. And so, you're double dutching, trying to get your take out. And so I said, okay, stuck with that for a little while, and I ended up becoming the host of that show. And
Mm.
I became the host of that show. Then I ended up having my own show. And during that time, one of my sorors from Prairie View A&M, she's the not sports editor, she's the editor, excuse me, of Houston Style Magazine. And so
Okay.
she asked me, she said, "Have you ever thought about doing some writing?" And I think that this was during a time where it was the last time the Super Bowl was here in Houston. And so she said, "You ever thought about doing some writing?" I was like, "Yeah, maybe. I mean, I've never really thought about it, but I mean, I'm pretty sure I can do it. I think that I'm a pretty good writer." My first article looked like a dissertation. When I still have that first article, Look, I still have that first article because it reminds me of how far I've come. And so I look at it sometimes and I just be like, hey, what were you writing? A book? And I was like, it had great content, but the format was horrible. And so I started from there, started covering the Texans on a limited basis, started covering the Astros on a limited basis. Then I worked my way up to the Rockets. And so I just progressed over time as a writer. And then, like I said, I've had my own sports show. I want to say a month ago, I just stopped doing a sports show with former NFL player Indy Kalu. It's called In the Trenches on iHeartRadio. And so
Mm-hmm.
he just ended his 12-year run on the radio. And so I was with him for the last 5 years, 3 days a week. And so I just got off of doing radio. So now, I work and I work hard and I never forget where I came from. I love telling that story about holding the camera because people think that you get into sports and it's like, oh man, you got season credentials. You just jumped into it. And I was like, no, I put in the work. I was willing to do if I had to give advice to someone, to anyone that's listening that wants to be part of the media, I will say this. First of all, you got to put your pride to the side. That's the very first thing you have to do. And you got to be willing to hear no. I was told no so many times. I was rejected so many times. Or, hey, you can come cover the practice, but you can't cover the games. And I said, that's fine with me. As long as I'm in the building, I can work my way up. I can make my connections. And, eventually I work my way up to Big Sarge.
Okay. Okay. So I love that. I absolutely do because that's where I'm trying to go. And I think right now, I'll say this. Now, my first article did not look like a dissertation. I do create content by day in my profession, so I knew a little bit about what I was doing when I was writing. But I would say
Yes.
my first article from then till now is like it's worlds better now. Like I can add context, it's not as long. Yeah, but yeah, when you first start writing, you're like, ooh, oh, this is a little tougher than I was thinking. Because right, like you're writing for fans, you're writing for just general readers, things like that, and you got to write with intent, and you want to
Yes.
put your own lens on it, your own analysis on it. But it's like making a nice like meal, and you're trying to make sure that it's just right. And this is every time you write. So now I was like, okay,
And
this is a bit much for me.
I had to learn the format. And I also I will say this one thing that wasn't intimidating to me, but I mean, okay, so we're both from the South, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we got that Southern hospitality, but we are also we intertwine and intermingle with people who are not from the South. I know a lot of people who cover the Texans that are from Chicago, that's from Miami, that's from New York, and they don't have that Southern hospitality. So the very first time I was in a scrum and everybody was just talking, I was like, oh, this is rude. Like, how come y'all like? This guy has a question to ask. Why are you talking over him? Like, let him ask you a question, or well, wait a minute. Hold, everybody, be quiet. Go ahead and ask your question. Like, I wanted to say that, but then I was just like, why is everybody just hollering? So my first time in a scrum, I would put it like this: it took me at least 5 to 7 press conferences before I even asked a question because I had to learn I had to learn decorum. I had to learn, the way, the rules and the regulations of how this thing works. And no one was teaching me. I was out
Mm-hmm.
there on my own and I was getting a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And I just started watching people. So, and that's the advice I give too. Hey, just watch. Watch people in the way that they do things and pick up the good, keep the good, and throw away the bad. But now that's why I'm one of those people now. When there's new media members that come in, I pull them to the side and say, hey, look, I am here and available because I know what it's like starting out.
That is awesome. I love that. And you're right. I think anytime I've watched these press conferences, I'm like, oh, there's a whole lot of rudeness going on. And I will say this, for me, I think that would be such a it would be I would do the same thing where I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna watch. I'm gonna pick my spots because I'm small in stature. I'm about 5'2". So I'm probably smaller than the rest of these folks. I'm not loud by nature at all. So yeah, for me having to speak up and then speak over people, yeah, no, I'll be right here.
Me tell you something right now. Now I'm one of those guys that's like, hey, I just started talking, and I am a big guy, so I'll just hey, so like I remember last week, and it's funny because where you position yourself is you also have to be in the right position. everybody has up front. They're going, because you think about the person that you're interviewing, they automatically focus on the people in the front. So if you're in the back and you're talking and they're trying to strain to hear you, while this person in front, they're going to just automatically focus here. So last week, when we were at the combine, of course, on the day that the quarterback spoke, Bryce Young went first, then CJ Stroud, and then Anthony Richardson. And they all were speaking at podium number 1. And so I think the interview started at 8. I was at the convention center by 7:15 so that I could sit up front and get up front, and so I could ask the questions that I needed to ask. And so, people will be talking and they'll be like, so Bryce, when you, and I'll be like, Bryce, so when you were, and so he automatically, just focuses right here. So I've learned that little trick of the trade. But then again, like I said, I'm loud. So if I am at the back of the room, I'm gonna be heard too.
I love it. So speaking of the combine, let's talk about that. So Combine's in Indy, which, by the way, it's a lovely facility. If you've never been to Lucas Oil, it's a phenomenal stadium. It's one of the best in the NFL. Shameless plug. But all right, so the talk of the Combine obviously was the quarterbacks. That was what everyone's been waiting on. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. Let's talk about who impressed you outside of the quarterbacks. And I'll probably lump it together. Who did you think might be potential fits for the Texans? So what were some of the things that you were looking for, players that you were looking at?
So, I can't mention Anthony Richardson at all.
We'll come back there. We'll come back there. I know that's the easy, low hanging fruit. I'm down in the trenches. I'm like, okay, let's talk pick 12. Let's talk second round. Let's talk those picks.
So, of course, here's a name that nobody's probably going to pay attention to, but this young man, he impressed me because of not only the way that the fast 40 time that he ran, but the way that he completed the drills. And Northwestern running back Evan Hull completed the drill out. And I heard that they were talking about it on the NFL Network too, but every drill that he went through, he ran all the way to the end zone. Every drill for him ended in the end zone. And so I said, okay, because I wasn't really familiar with him. Then I went back and I looked at some of his highlights and I said to myself, oh, this young man could really play the game, even though Northwestern had a 1-9 record, if I'm not mistaken, last year. But he was he just stood out and he popped out. And he was one of those guys where he's a guy that if you get him in space, he's amazing. Reminds me a lot of Alvin Kamara. When Alvin Kamara, running back for the New Orleans Saints, when he gets in space, he's really hard to stop. And so that's what Evan Hull reminded me of in the way that he just went through his drills. Since we're talking about running backs, Devon Achane running back out of Texas A&M, here's a young man that the only knock on him is his size. He's 5'9", but he's willing to do any and everything that a coach needs him to do. He told us that he's played special teams before. And so on Wednesday, we got a chance to, on Wednesday, the Texans introduced their new offensive coordinator and defense coordinator. And then because they retained their special teams coach, Frank Ross, I was talking to Frank and I specifically asked Frank, I said, you have a young man who was the man at his college. I said, when you hear that he's not afraid to play special teams, if you need him to play special teams, just what does that mean to you? And he's like, that gets me excited. And so, for a young man like that, to want to play special teams, he just wants to be on a team. And so, like I said, I was really impressed by him. The running backs impressed me the most, if you really want to know. I mean, of course, everybody was there to see Bijan Robinson, and he's not going to disappoint. But there's also a young man that plays defensive back out of South Carolina named Darius Rush. Now, I think Cam Smith is the South Carolina guy that everybody loves. But make sure you watch Darius Rush. And, you said shameless plug earlier. He is an alpha, so I want to make sure that I throw his name out there because I feel like he's going to be a good guy. Who else did I see? I seen a lot of I cannot forget this. There was a center out of Minnesota, John Michael Smith Jr. Yeah, Smith Jr. Oh my goodness. So at this is my first combine that I've ever covered. Every time I've always watched him on television. And I will be honest with you, I was one of those guys who said, Oh man, the combine ain't nothing but t-shirts and shorts. Guys in tights with their shirts off trying to show off their bodies. They're man, ain't nobody got time for the combine. So this year, when I actually got a chance to be there in person, I see why so many people go there, and I see why it means so much because you're not you're not looking at a guy run the 40. You're not looking at a guy running drills. At least I wasn't. I'm looking at fundamentals because
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, I'm looking at a guy's footwork. Like Iowa defensive lineman Van Ness. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Luke Van Ness.
Luke Finesse. Yep.
Yeah. I'm watching him and the way that he goes through these drills. And I was like, okay, so, we could talk about, oh, these are just drills, but look at his fundamentals. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching I'm watching him, I'm watching these defensive linemen, these linebackers, these wide receivers running these routes. There's a safety out of Houston, out right here in Houston. They played for the Houston Cougars, University of Houston, named Javarius Owens. And here's a guy that a lot of people don't know his name. When you think about the University of Houston, you think about wide receiver Tank Dell. But here's a young man that, one, did not drop a pass throughout all the drills. He did not drop a pass. That
Wow.
impresses me because that lets me know he's a ball hawk. Two, the way he got in and out of his movements. Like I wouldn't have watched that if I wasn't, live and in person. If it was on television, I'd probably been watching because Law and Order SVU is on. Between Law and Order SVU and NCIS New Orleans, like I can't stop watching either of those. I don't care how many times I've seen the show. So, but watching him in person and watching him be able to get in and out of the breaks, and then going back and reading some of his strengths and weaknesses, it's just one of those things. Like it was a great experience. I can't wait to go back.
Wow. Yeah. I will say this. Yes, as a fan watching it from my house, I was highly jealous of I mean, you probably saw me. I was live tweeting out, some of these 40 times, people who I thought looked great in their drills. And I think, I would say from a Colts lens, I was like, oh, I'm like, the division is going to get real interesting, with some of these guys being added. Just because, I mean, a lot of the classes, there were several positions I thought were pretty deep. Um, John Michael Schmitz was on my radar. Cody Mauch was on my radar. Dewan Jones on my radar. Those sorts of kind of guys. So Colts need some offensive linemen. I think I tweeted wrote out a couple of articles on hey, wide receiver fits or quarterback fits or things like that. But yeah, you're gonna have some steep competition from other folks in the division, especially I think the Texans have 11 picks. So I'm like, holy cow! Like we need to catch up.
And it's crazy they lost a pick and gained a pick today.
Yeah, I saw that.
Round pick and gained a seventh round pick.
Yeah. Still have 11 picks. So yeah, okay, all right. So let's talk about biggest takeaway. So obviously, I'm going to come back to the quarterbacks. So I heard you mention Anthony Richardson. What was your biggest takeaway from him?
So, like I said, here's a young man that I've only watched on television. I've never gotten a chance to meet in person until the combine. So I'm big on I listen a lot. I'm one of those people that I listen and I watch body language when someone is talking. So I'm huge on observing before I even open my mouth to say a word. I need to see, okay, I'm just gonna listen. I just want to hear, what's going on. Anthony Richardson is one of those guys, and I wrote an article on him because I did not know his full and complete story. But after I wrote the article, it started to make sense to me. You ever, because you've been around sports for a while, if either playing them, watching them, covering them, there are certain guys that you listen to and you say to yourself, "Oh, he has to." He in his mind, there's no such thing as failure. Like he has those, like Bomani Jones, who works for ESPN. He has this saying, "Can't go back." In Anthony Richardson's mind, he can't go back. Here's a young man that him and his mom, he come from a single parent home, but his mom and his brother moved from Miami because they were living from Miami to Gainesville because they were moving from different relatives' houses. And so his mom was like, I need to make a better situation. I need better living arrangements for my kids. And so they
Mm-hmm.
moved to Gainesville, Florida. There, Anthony talks about stories of him having to take his brother back and forth to different places on a mountain bike. He said, if you seen me on the black mountain bike, you seen my little brother on the handlebars. And he said, he's more like my son than he is my brother. So I prefaced all that to say, when I'm listening to him and I'm listening to his answers, and he's saying, yes, I may have weaknesses in, in completion percentage. I don't like my completion percentage either, but I'm going to work on it. And hearing him talk, I said to myself, okay, I hear it now. And I hear that here's a young man that's determined to prove something to other people. Determined to prove something to other people, but also going to show his mother, I'm going to get us out of this situation. And so he went from there. When he stepped onto that field, first of all, he's a massive young man. I mean, like, this is really like baby Cam Newton, in the flesh. You heard his he called himself Cam Jackson because Cam and Lamar Jackson are his favorite quarterbacks. But when he stepped onto that field, it was almost like his physical presence. You could just say, okay, all eyes have to be directed towards him. And he did not disappoint. And so I just tweeted this today that some of the positives, well, let me say this, some of the positives, I loved his arm strength. When he was throwing 60 to 65 yards, he wasn't even taking a step. He was just throwing the ball. It was really like he was just playing catch with his little brother, where you had other quarterbacks who had to step into the throw to get the ball down the field. So you could see the raw natural talent. You could see the abilities. Of course, everybody's seen the 40 time. Everybody knows the vertical jump, the broad jump. But things like that just stood out to me just watching him. Now, he does have to work on the out route. The out route, the sideline throws, the throw that they say is one of the hardest to make in the NFL. He does have to work on that. But so did Josh Allen when he was coming out of college. And so here's a young man, you just got to give him time. He only had 12 starts throughout his entire career. And how many other systems did he go through? So I'm very interested to see where he's going to go. Now, with that being said, if I could take CJ Stroud's throwing accuracy and his ability to throw people open and put it into Anthony Richardson, I would say Anthony Richardson would be the number one overall pick. Indy would get him like they want to, because they want to trade up to get that number one pick from the Bears. And hold on, and they're also in love with Will Levis, but that's another story for another time.
Oh no!
And I wish Bryce Young would have gotten a chance, but CJ Stroud was one of those guys that exudes confidence as well. And I just like watching both of them. I was surprised that Stetson Bennett ran a 4.5, but then I was like, well, he's also like 40, so he should be outrunning everybody. And Max Duggan, I was like, all right, keep an eye on Malik Cunningham out of Louisville.
Yeah. Those are some good names. Yeah. I will say this. I think as a Colts fan, like, and now writing about the Colts, you're having to be really like practical. I've heard a lot of wild scenarios, about whether or not the Colts are going to trade up, who they're looking at, things like that, who makes sense. I do think that you're very likely going to see quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, with it being CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, and Anthony Richardson. I said, oh my gosh, about Will Levis, because one of my buddies, Mike, who's a Texans fan, has been, lighting us up in this group chat about, Will Levis and him and his mayo and his coffee, and the Colts are going to love him, and, that sort of thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, as soon as you said it, I'm like, I'm never going to hear the end of it from Mike. But I do think that, to that point, I do think that Anthony Richardson will be a very intriguing prospect for whoever takes him. The intangibles are certainly there. The high character is there. I don't know if you saw, there was the draw my play that he did with Steve Mariucci, and that was the first thing I noticed was, one, he's a massive dude. He's huge, but he's very, very gentle and soft in the way that he he talks and he carries himself. One thing I liked is that you could tell he's cerebral. Like he drew up Mariucci's play almost nearly perfect. I think the only thing he missed was that he put the quarterback in shotgun, and the quarterback should have been under center. Like, that was the only minor detail that he missed. But like, for a play that you just saw, like 30 seconds before, like, holy cow, it's like, all right, so this dude, like, he gets it.
Yeah.
So I think that he'll be a really solid pick. Although I do not think the pick will be Anthony Richardson for the Texans. I do think that it'll be Bryce Young. That's my feeling. But I'm curious to know like what D'Amico Ryan thinks along with Nick Caserio. So let's talk about that. So the Texans have had a lot going on, right? So let's back up to the last game of the season. Texans fans are probably screaming at the top of their lungs. So you let the Colts get into now the fourth slot. So I think we were at 5 at that point. End up
Yes.
losing that game to the Texans. Talk yourself out of the number 1 pick. So now you're at 2. Lovett gets fired or released. Now
Fired.
yeah, okay, all right, fired. It's a good word. Good word for the situation. So Lovett gets fired. You have this really nice search. D'Amico Ryan's hometown guy, franchise guy comes in. Everybody absolutely loves that selection, which, by the way, I think is a phenomenal selection for the franchise. But I want to know, like, what do you think D'Amico Ryan's will not only bring to the team, but let's talk about maybe some things that he highlighted in his press conference about what he's looking for in a young quarterback.
So the young man that I told you about, that I was a guest host on his show, Indy Kalu. So Indy played for the Philadelphia Eagles. He played for the team in Washington because at the time they were called something else, and now they're called the Washington Commanders. And he also
Yep.
played for the Houston Texans. But when he played for the Houston Texans, D'Amico Ryans also played for the Houston Texans. And so when D'Amico was being considered for the head coaching job, I got a chance to talk to Indy, and Indy told me that if the Texans hire him, it will be the best hire that they've made in franchise history. And this is coming from a guy who's a huge Kubiak guy. He loves Kubiak. But he said, we were calling D'Amico Ryan's captain as a rookie. He said, because he walks into a room, he commands the room. And then not only does he command the room, he goes out and he plays hard. He's going to give you everything that he got. And away from the field, he's always studying. He knows where everybody's supposed to be. He knows the offensive side, the defensive side. And so this is a young man who has proven it on the field and proven it as a coach, as the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. So what he brings is that he brings that other intangible that Bill O'Brien didn't have, that David Culley didn't have, that Lovie Smith didn't have. He knows the lingo. I like to tell this story when I talk about D'Amico is, I'm proud military. I'm a veteran. And so in the military, there's certain acronyms and there's certain jargon that we use to find out things from you. So, we'll say something like, have you ever been downrange? And in layman's terms, that means, have you ever been to a war zone? Have you ever been to Kuwait? Have you ever been to Afghanistan? Have you ever been to Iraq? What's your MOS? That's your job. What is your job in the military? And so you start talking that type of vernacular. And for someone that's been in the military, that's been in the Army especially, they know how to communicate with you. What D'Amico Ryans brings is he's been a player. He's played at the highest level. Not only was he All-American in college, and not only is he very intelligent, he took that to the next level. And then after that level, he took it over into the coaching ranks and then had the top 5 defense the last 2 years in the NFL. So here's a guy that when players look at him and talk to him, he's coming from a whole different perspective because he can talk to you as a player, but he can talk to you as a coach. And as the young players that the Texans have, is they're definitely going to be able to resonate because they've watched him. So he's going to bring that. Not only is he going to bring that credibility factor to the Texans, because you've watched the Texans, you've watched the AFC South, you've seen that it's been a clown show here for the last 3 years, and I'm talking about including. You go all the way back to the year they fired Bill O'Brien after 5 games, and then later on that season, even though Deshaun Watson was having his best season of the year, they still only won 4 games. And then after that, you bring in a long-term assistant like David Culley, and you still have the Deshaun Watson cloud hanging over the Houston Texans. And then after that, you're about to hire Brian Flores, and next thing you know, here's a lawsuit. And then Okay, let's move on to Josh McCown. Oh, well, the owners called and said we can't hire Josh McCown because he doesn't have enough. Wait, who he work for now?
I think it's
Carolina,
the
right?
Jets. Oh, Carolina. Yeah, Carolina.
Carolina,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
So now, because the job that he's doing was the job that he was offered by the Texans, but they were going to hire him, and so people reached out and said, "Nah, you can't do that." So now you insert Lovie Smith, right? All the while you still have Jack Easterby in the mix, and so there's been just a bad cloud hanging over the Houston Texans for the last 3 years. So what D'Amico brings is credibility and accountability, because there's no way that these players are going to go out and do and do a half job on the field, and then you got to come down and sit in front of D'Amico Ryans, a person who is giving you his all every time. And so while I don't expect a lot of wins from the Texans this year, I do expect some type of groundwork, some type of foundation to be laid for D'Amico Ryans to build off of that.
I love that. And I hope Texans fans are listening. Like, hey, foundation here. It's some of the things that we've been talking about in these Twitter spaces. I've been trying to stress to them the importance of patience, because I know you're tired. I know you're frustrated. Everything that you just explained to me, fans are feeling, and I could feel it when I went to that Texans Titans game. Like, I'll say this. You didn't see a lot of fans in the stadium. You saw them outside, like in the parking lot, like they were tailgated. They weren't, I mean, they're still going to support their team, but they know where their limitations are. And you can tell that there was a sense of angst, I think, a little bit with fans, and they're wanting better for their team. And so I think with this hiring of D'Amico Ryans, all you've done now is, I mean, you've re-energized the team, you've given them a new identity. And I wish him the best. I wish him success, except for when you played the Colts. And I honestly want the franchise to have great success with him. He deserves that. He has been phenomenal with the 49ers. And you heard nothing but good things when watching his press conference and talking to fans afterwards. So yeah, I love that. Love that.
He's one of those guys where, like, even when he's not in the room, his presence is still being felt. And so now with that being said, now you have these players that are going to look and say, I got to give my all. And so when you already have a running back like Dameon Pierce, who is one of those guys who just, I don't think I've ever seen Dameon Pierce not run hard. I think I don't even know when his motor turns off. And so, you have a guy, and D'Amico speaks very, very highly of Dameon Pierce. He speaks very, very highly even of, safety Jalen Petrie. And these are these are going to be 2 second-year players that he's also laying that foundation in. Now, with that being said, right, and I didn't know if you want to go here or not, but I'm going to go here real quick if you don't mind.
All right, let's go.
There's no possible way that they cannot take a quarterback and a wide receiver with the number 1 and the number 12 pick. The only way, the number 2 and the number 12 pick, because Nick Caserio will not trade up. He's not going to give up assets to get the number 1 spot. And side note, you said about, so the Texans losing the Colts game wasn't as bad. Beating the Colts, The Texans defeating the Colts wasn't the game that really put the Texans in the situation that they're in right now. It was when they won on Christmas Eve against the Tennessee Titans. Nobody expected them to win that game except them. And I'll tell you this, when they were coming off the field, they was like, Merry Christmas, we blah, 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 because you think about it, earlier that year, earlier in the season, I think Derrick Henry had almost 200 yards rushing against them. Like, they were embarrassed because they were starting against a rookie quarterback in Malik Willis, who they just said, hey, you get the ball to Derrick. And then Derrick embarrassed them. So for as big as a rival as the Tennessee Titans is for them, when they beat them, now I'm saying to myself, okay, so you got your Christmas Day game out of the way. Cool. If you want that number 1 spot, you got to lose these next 2 games. The next week, they lost to Jacksonville. And then let's just be honest. They tried to give the game away to the Colts. but the Colts just wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
By 10 points.
Yeah, I mean, like at one point I was like, somebody just win this game. Like it doesn't matter at this point. Like and then Sam Ellinger threw a pick, and I was like, all right, Sam, understood the assignment. Thank you.
And so at this point, though, them sitting at that number 2 spot, they're looking at it like this: they love Bryce Young, but they also love C.J. Stroud. So if Indy, jumps up and trades up to get that number 1 spot so they can take whichever one of those quarterbacks, cool. If Carolina jumps up and takes that spot, then cool. It's okay with Nick. Nick is not going to. There has to be a significant amount of assets that he's going to get back for him to say, okay, I'll trade down. Or there has to be something in the works for him to trade with Chicago, because one thing that I can say about Nick Caserio, well, 2 things. 1, he's a very smart man. 2, he's a former scout. So Nick Caserio, along with the scouts, found Dameon Pierce. They found Thomas Booker, defensive lineman, that was a rookie but got a lot of snaps last year. So, at this, they're sitting right exactly where they would have loved to have the number 1 spot, of course. But I think that not only would they have loved to have the number 1 spot to pick their quarterback, but Nick knew that if he had the number 1 spot, then he could be the one wheeling and dealing like Chicago plans on doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes it very interesting. I will say this. I think Chris Ballard also is one that's probably not going to trade up. Now, I will say this, that there's a lot of folks who probably don't agree with that, but if you go off Chris Ballard's history, like he's more of a man that's going to let the board come to him. And he said it in his own press conference at the combine, like they have to be blown away. This is absolutely no doubt the guy. And I think they would also have to get some indication like, hey, somebody's coming up to come get their guy for them to go up.
We'll see.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily Jim Irsay like not being in the room, but I'll say this. As far as the draft day goes, I know that Jim Irsay does have some influence, but Chris Ballard is the one that pulls the trigger on those trades. And he's only traded up 3 times in his tenure. It was for Jonathan Taylor, it's for Khari Willis, and it was last year for Nick Cross. That's it. So otherwise, he's typically traded back. He even made a joke in his end of season, or in his Shane Steichen's press conference that that they could trade back, and everybody groaned in the room because they know that is what he does. Like that is his MO. He's more likely to trade down because he likes his picks and things like that. So I would be curious to see who outbids who. I do think that it will not be the Texans or the Colts at 1. I do think the Carolina Panthers will come up and get Will Levis. That's my pick. Levis to the Panthers. Will Levis has Frank Wright written all over him. Yes, and I think you get Josh McCown. Yeah, Josh McCown there as quarterback coach now. You've got, a phenomenal staff that Frank Reich has been putting together that screams, hey, we need to come, develop us a rookie quarterback. So that's my pick. I'm putting it into the atmosphere. If I had to pick who I think the Colts are getting, I do think it'll be Anthony Richardson or C.J. Stroud. I've heard that they are high on both.
So that's what I was going to ask you, too, because since we're talking about the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts, and this is just what I believe, and I would love to get your take on it. Shane Steichen has already worked with the shorter version of Anthony Richardson and Jalen Hurts. And I feel like that he could bring a lot of that playbook that he had with Jalen Hurts, to Indianapolis and do the same things with Anthony Richardson that he did with Jalen Hurts. And especially when you have, when you have an athletic quarterback that can do RPOs like him, you got a top 5 running back in Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. And, if they go out and they can get them some wide receivers, I honestly and truly feel that is an offense. I feel like there's only one other offense designed for Anthony Richardson. And now what I mean by design, I mean that there's only one other offensive coordinator that I think that would use him to his full potential, and that would be Eric Bieniemy with the Washington Commanders. So if the Washington Commanders, does not get Anthony Richardson, or if they don't get, because I want them to get Lamar Jackson too, but that's another story for another time. Shane Steichen would definitely, I feel like, would benefit with having Anthony Richardson. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. So if you look at the quarterbacks that Shane Steichen has developed, you got Phillip Rivers later in his career, you've got Justin Herbert rookie year, and you got Jalen Hurts. The jump that Jalen Hurts had from end of 2021 season, we'll say that, into this season is, I mean, it's almost night and day. It's like, holy cow. Where he benefits from is that Steichen is just obsessed with craft, just obsessed with film as he expects his players to be. So he's in the trenches with them. One of the things that Chris Ballard talked about was, yeah, Steichen sees the game the way I see the game. So they're both on the same page there, that's great. That's the first thing. Other things that they talked about wanting was accuracy. You want them to be obsessed with craft, above the neck. Those are things that they talked about, being cerebral players. I think that Anthony Richardson does fit some of that. Where it comes into question is accuracy. And I think that he spoke, I think this was maybe very recently, about like, hey, improving his footwork would help with his accuracy. So there's debates from folks about whether or not, accuracy can be improved and, that sort of thing. But I think that you look at like a case like a Josh Allen, where, I mean, Allen's first year, 2 years in the league were just brutal, right? Like they weren't the Josh Allen that we know now. Then he takes this phenomenal leap in year 3, where I think the Colts have to figure out if they're willing to do that with Anthony Richardson is like now. Like, are you willing to live with, probably the bumps and the humps, right? Like
Yes.
you had Peyton, you went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck to a bunch of Band-Aids for for several seasons.
Hey, don't
Just
knock
trying to figure it
Jacoby
out.
like that.
Hey, I love Jacoby. I do as a person. I really love him. But it was it's another Band-Aid, right? Like it's a lot of Band-Aids in there. So this would be the first time that you're having to draft a quarterback with the intent that he's going to start. So it's now like, okay, how much patience do you have? How much leeway is this player going to have? And if so, if you're going to need a lot of leeway, I think you got the right guy in the building. You got Shane Steichen, who can help develop a quarterback. I think that leaves them with either, CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson. I think the only thing that would prevent the Colts from taking Bryce Young, even though I think he checks nearly every box for them, is the size factor. And even though he was, 204 at the combine, I still think that's a little slimmer than what the Colts are typically used to. But the caveat I always give is we don't really have anything to base it off of for the Colts. Like the 2 quarterbacks Ballard has drafted, Jacob Eason was 6'6", 230, and Sam Elder is 6'1", 220. And everybody else has been retread, so to speak. It's been Phillip Rivers, it's been, Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan. And while those are bigger body quarterbacks, no one was really thinking about like, okay, this is a big quarterback. Like it was just, no, we need a guy.
Yeah.
So, we don't really know what is Ballard's prototypical. I can kind of go off what I've heard and what I've seen in the press conferences and, things like that. But I think they leave the door open. And he just said very recently too, he's like, quarterbacks come in all shapes and sizes. That was straight from his mouth. So I think he left the door open himself to say like, hey, you guys think you're going to pin me down into someone? Like, no, we're going to keep our eyes open.
Yeah, I tried to pin him down, asking him about, I asked him, does another team who needs a quarterback in your division affect your draft board? And he was like, we'll get to that when it's time.
Yeah, no, he's. I mean, I will say this: they've done very, very well with not tipping their hand. I think Jim Irsay did the really nice troll job in the Shane Steichen press conference about the Bryce Young comment. Everyone took that and like ran with it, but real people knew like it was Jim Irsay trolling. And from Shane Steichen's press conference, from Chris Ballard's press conference at the combine, like neither one of them really tipped their hands about what they were looking for. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to come to the part of the podcast. It's called Blue Light Special. So you get to ask me questions now, sports related or not, and I will answer them honestly.
So my first question, of course, would be, how did you get your start?
Yeah, so I actually got tweeted at last year. It was about August of last year, and someone was like, hey, they're looking for Colts fans who want to write. And I'm like, okay. And it was a very casual way for me to get through the off season. Like we had just had a horrific like end of the season, still reeling, that sort of thing. Started writing for a company called Stadium Rant. They were a media company based out of Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And I started up writing for them 2 articles a week. And then it grew into, hey, would you be interested in being a managing editor for the site? And I'm like, sure, I create content in my professional job. Like, yeah, I'll do it. And it just grew from there. Started doing a podcast, and then it became, writing 4 articles a week. And managing a staff of 6 writers, which was really awesome for me to get 6 guys like to buy in to come write with me and do podcasts with me. And at the end of last year, I started thinking about like what's the next step? Like, what do we do here? I realized I was really good at writing, really good at storytelling. I mean, who knew, but it's different when you're doing it with NFL content. I think this was the first time I really didn't care whether people liked it or not. I was just writing for the standpoint of like, I want to be honest. I want to be real. I want to, give my insights and my thoughts because people were going to have their opinions on it, but I wanted to make sure like I stayed true to what I wrote and what I put on my podcast as well. And then, yeah, I connected with Coltswire. It was a by chance, like sort of situation. I actually had connected with the managing editor and reached out to him. And I was like, hey, this is what I do. Would love to come, write for you guys. And he said, yeah, we don't have anything right now, but, I'll keep you in mind. And lo and behold, connected with Kevin in January. And here we are, writing for Coltswire now, which is really awesome. Cause that was, it was almost a shot in the dark, really. It was just like, hey, I want to keep expanding. And I've realized this is something I like. It's really something I love. So it's a passion. So I really like sharing stories with people, and I like sharing stories with folks about football. As a former athlete, I get joy out of it, and as a Colts fan, yeah, I get to put my passion into not necessarily a fan perspective, but just in general, like, hey, writing with a just objective sort of slate whenever I write.
So, and wait, first of all, congratulations on that too. I just started with Texans Wire last year. So I've been covering the Texans since 2017, and I just moved over because I'm the sports editor for Houston Style Magazine.
Yeah.
And so, but I write exclusive content for Texans Wire and Rockets Wire. So
Okay. Yeah.
I still write content for Houston Style Magazine, and all my Astros content is through Houston Style Magazine. But yeah, so congratulations on that. Now, this is going to tell me whether or not, well, this is going to tell me how Southern you really are.
Okay. All right.
You put sugar on your grits?
I do put sugar on my grits, sugar and butter on my grits. Yeah.
Don't let them people down. Don't let them people in Georgia try to tell you different. Like, nah, it's supposed to be salt and pepper.
Salt,
like,
pepper,
no.
cheese, and
Yeah.
So no, sugar on my grits. Yeah, sugar on my grits. Yeah.
How do you balance your life? Meaning, how do you balance being a wife, a mom, your professional jobs?
Yeah. I get that question a lot. And to be honest with you, I'm not even quite sure how I do it a lot of days. I think when I first started doing this, it was like, okay, can I just find an hour of time to write? Then it became, okay, well, yeah, that was an hour. I can carve out 2 hours. Then it became like, I'm sitting on my phone for 2-3 hours before I go to bed. I could be writing, I could be podcasting. Like I started realizing like I could be more optimal with my time. And then it became conversation with my husband. It was, hey, I want to continue to do this. Can I schedule, my podcast? Can I schedule my writing around his work schedule? Because his work schedule is a little more volatile than mine. And so, yeah, it was like, how can we balance? So it was, hey, I got a podcast tonight. Can you watch The Boys? I got to write tonight. Can you watch The Boys? And yeah, he realized how much I love this, how much, it was a passion for me. And he was like, yeah, whatever you need. So then I didn't worry really about, balancing. It was just telling him like, yeah, I'll be writing tonight. Hey, I'm going to go write tonight. Hey, I got a podcast or whatever else. So it made me feel supported. And so when you feel supported, you're like, yeah, you feel like you got the leeway to do what you need to. So I think the biggest thing for me was just making sure that this didn't like drain me in any sort of way. Cause I very transparent moment. I'm really good about volunteering myself for lots of things and then being drained.
Yes.
So yeah, I had to make sure that wasn't the case. And when I realized it wasn't, like, I could be drained all day. I could have had a hellacious day, but I'll get home and I get to write. Yeah, energy comes on. I get to podcast, energy like comes. I'll find it.
Yeah, for sure. As soon as I put this hat on, I know that it's time for business. And you do okay. So, like, how many of these can I ask you? Because, like, I'm a journalist too. So, I ask questions for a living too. I was like, wait a minute, I can't be asking because I got questions, and then I'm like, oh yeah, let me ask you this because, like,
go for it.
Okay, so you have one pick, right?
Yeah.
You have one pick. You are an owner of an NBA franchise. You only got one pick. LeBron or Jordan?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, I'm gonna go Jordan. I'm definitely gonna go Jordan. Like, I'll say this: I grew up in the LeBron era, so let me say
Hmm.
that. Like, I actually technically grew up in both eras, but and more so in the LeBron era. But the it's something about Michael Jordan being clutch when you need him, taking over games that just it's not it's not any knock against LeBron because I won't say LeBron's not clutch. I've seen him be clutch, but I feel like Jordan's a bit more consistent in being clutch. And I'm thinking of those like critical situations where I need to lean on someone. I'm gonna go Jordan.
Wait. So are we just saying clutching the 6 championships or clutch the 7 years prior and the 2 years with the Washington Wizards? Like what? Because people only get caught on the last dance, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
that's what I'm saying. So let me say this. I want to say March of 2018. Because I've lived in both eras as well. I'm old enough to have seen live Michael Jordan hit the game-winning shot for North Carolina in the NCAA championship, right? All the way up to LeBron, right now. So for the longest time, I had Michael, and then March 2018. I said LeBron. I said Michael can no longer be my goat. Not for me because it's subjective. It's
yeah.
subjective.
It is.
Not
Yeah,
what you like. And what I like the fact that we're talking about LeBron, who is the all-time leading scorer, but he's also top 5 in assists. So he's
yeah.
getting his points and he's getting other people involved. And I know, okay, so we can talk about the amount of NBA finals that he's lost, but let's talk about the amount of NBA finals that he went to. So that's why I got
All right.
LeBron over Jordan. Even though if you look all right here, I ain't got none but Jordans. Well, I got one pair of LeBrons that say James because they hurt my feet. That's why. And KD's my favorite basketball player, but his shoes, I can't do that. So you cover football, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
love football, right? You've been watching football since you were knee high to a duck butt, right?
yeah, yeah,
Football is a violent sport. Would you
yeah.
allow your sons to play?
Oh, we've had this conversation. We've had, and I struggle with this answer a whole lot because I also watched my brother play and I watched the toll that it took on his knees and on his back and things like that. Like my brother played both ways. And so, I think he had a little bit more of attrition. And I think for me, the mom in me is like, I want to protect my children, like put them in a bubble. But the sports fan in me is like, come on, boys, let's go. Like, that sort of thing. I, I don't know. I'll tell you that answer. I don't know. I really don't know. I think for me, it's more of I don't want to be the one that stifles my children because I'm afraid of whether or not they're going to get hurt. It would more so depend on is it a passion for them? Does it make them happy? Are they able to play it safely in the games that I've seen or things like that? But I don't want my mama heart to be like, absolutely not, that sort of thing. And then, my oldest comes to me and says, Mom, I want to play. I think if my husband were to answer that, he'd probably say no. He's a baseball guy, so he'd love for them to both be baseball players because so was he. But for me, it's just can you be safe in any sport that you play, and no matter what the sport is, I want to make sure that you're happy.
All right. I got two more.
Okay.
The next to the last one is this. The Colts make the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah. Okay.
The Colts make the Super Bowl, right? But one of your kids has a recital on the same night.
Oh
What
my gosh.
are you going to the recital or are you staying home and watching your favorite football team play in the Super Bowl?
Mm.
Because the Super Bowl isn't something you can watch on replay.
It isn't. Yeah, that's true. I'm actually going to the recital, and I'm probably following the Super Bowl on my phone.
I'm not doing the recital.
No, not during the recital, but you know me, I would probably check. If you know me, you know that I have football notifications on my phone all day long. So I'm probably checking at least, or things like that, or throwing it on in the car on the way home. But my children come first in that regard. Now, if I'm covering the Super Bowl, that's completely different. I'm sorry, somebody's gonna have to be with my children for that recital. But if it's like, hey, I
Uh,
get to, I get to watch. Yeah, I mean, my kids come first. Like I will say this, and I'll give you a big example. When I was growing up, I played violin, And this is long before I, really realized that I was creative or things like that. But at that point, all I wanted was for my parents to be there, and I loved the fact when they were there, when they were able to come to my games. But I'll give you a perfect example. My dad traveled a lot. He traveled a ton for his job. He was gone for a lot of my recitals, a lot of my critical moments that I had in high school, and he was able to be there for a few of my games when I played lacrosse in my senior year. But still, he missed a lot from middle school to high school. So if I could take back those moments and have my dad and have both my parents be there for me in those moments. My mom was there, of course, and family and friends. But if I could have my parents be back in those moments, yeah, I'd take that 1,000 times over, because those sort of things can sow back into your children so that they can be, the best people that they can be. So I get it. My favorite team's in Super Bowl, but my children comes first.
Last question I have for you: what is your why?
What is my why? Oh, that is a good one. Oh, yeah, I think it has to feed back into the podcast. It's all about stories. I really recently found my purpose, and it was sharing stories, like sharing, my story, where I've been. I think I felt very ashamed a bit of my story because it didn't look the way that I imagined in my head. Growing up as a kid, I wanted to initially I wanted to be a dentist. Then I wanted to, be this big, corporate, big wig, that sort of thing. And then it all changed for
Yes.
me last year. And I was telling my husband, I said, I don't think I ever stopped to ask myself if I would be happy. I just wanted big dreams. I wanted to feel like I had accomplished something, but it was never about being happy. And so I think that is deeper into my story of like, hey, I'm out here creating my happiness now. Like I'm in my element now, finding something that genuinely like energizes me. And then just admitting out loud, like, yeah, I'm a creative. I've always been a creative. I just didn't really like, tap into it because I felt like I had to have the secure thing. I felt like I had to, get the business degree because it's flexible and, those sorts of things. But yeah, it was all about, all right, now that you are creative, what do you do? Why? What's your why? And my why is sharing stories. And I feel like that could be done in any sort of medium, whether I meet you in person, whether I'm writing online, or whether I'm in a podcast.
Yeah, that's amazing. I like it.
Thank you.
I like it
I
a lot.
appreciate it.
But you like,
Yeah.
hey, like, look, note to self: don't have other journalists and media members on. They probably too many damn questions.
No, those are really good questions. The funny thing is I've gotten a range. I've gotten like super deep questions. I've gotten like funny questions. I've gotten like how do you balance questions. So yeah, I welcome it. I welcome it all. So no, I like that. I like that a lot. I got one more for you.
Okay.
And this will actually tell me a lot about you. And I like to ask this question because it makes people squirm a little bit. So favorite movie, you can only pick one because people usually have a list. They usually have like 4 to 5. So favorite movie, you can only pick one.
My favorite movie. Chronicles of Riddick.
Oh, that's a good one.
Chronicles of Riddick. That's like I watched that movie like I've never seen it. I don't know what's gonna happen, and I've watched that movie over and over, and I just don't know what it is about that movie. It's just that's my all-time favorite movie, Chronicles of Riddick.
I like it. I like it. It's rare you get that answer. Like, I like that. I like
Yeah,
that a lot.
because one day when we have some time, I'll tell you how I got cussed out by a lot of African Americans because I went down the top 10 list of movies, black movies that I don't like Love Jones, Dead Presidents, Color Purple.
What? Color Purple? What
Oh
did
wait,
Color Purple ever do
whoa,
to
whoa,
you?
wait, the worst of all time, Love and Basketball. Omar Epps is the worst actor slash sports guy in anyone. He sucked in Major League. He sucked in program. He sucked in higher learning, and he sucked in Love and Basketball. I was like, why do y'all keep casting this guy for sports movies, and he's no good at sports?
Oh my goodness, that's funny. First of all, my husband and I have conversations about Love and Basketball all the time because that's one of his favorite movies, and I tell him all the time, I'm like, this was a toxic relationship in a sports and a sports related movie. Like, it was terrible. Like, you go back and watch that with a different lens. Now I'm like, oh my God, like this man was terrible to her. Like, what?
I'll play you for your heart. I'd be like,
Yeah,
well,
exactly. Like, what? Play
like,
me
I'm
for
about
my
to
like
dog
what?
you because I mean, you ain't like what else is there on the line? Because I know I'm about to
Yeah.
do this because like I'm not playing for fun. Like, no,
Yeah. I was like, no, I'm done here. Like we're done after this. All
before
right. So yeah,
yeah,
go for it.
I just want to say this real quickly. And I know that I don't mean to serious us out, but I want to say this. I'm a huge advocate for mental health. And so I try to make sure that everybody's mental health is okay because I deal with mental health issues. I go to therapy. I have a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And so, and it took me the longest time. And I'm gonna tell you like this: as a 51-year-old African American male, I come from a household where you don't tell your business, you suppress
Mm-hmm.
everything. You know, the only people you tell your business, the business to, the in the house or the family, is to either big mama or the pastor. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. And neither one of them have degrees to be able to deal with everything that's going on in the family. None of them, none of them are psychiatrists or psychologists, like nothing. They just gonna tell you to go read the Bible or throw you a couple of scriptures. When like, no, I need some real help. And so it took me a long time to realize that I needed help. So I
Mm-hmm.
always try to make sure that I advocate for people to talk to somebody, like just talk. And for those of you all who the people talk to, sometimes you don't have to have a response, just listen. Like I tell
Mm-hmm.
people all the time, hey, look, I can't diagnose you, I can't prescribe you any medication, but what I am damn good at is listening. I
Mm-hmm.
will listen and we can have a conversation. I can't diagnose you with nothing. But sometimes people don't want responses. They just want you to listen so they can get it out. And so I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge advocate. And I talked about colon cancer earlier. I lost my late wife passed away in 2017. Everybody knows this story, but I'll just say it real quickly. She passed away from colon cancer, and one of the things that outside of being diagnosed with cancer, one of the things that also started to affect her was her mental health. Because you go
Mm-hmm.
healthy, because she passed away when she was 37, if I'm not mistaken. I gotta go. Yeah, I think 30, 37 to 39. I gotta go back and look. I can't remember right now, but she went from being perfectly healthy to stage 4 colon cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that affected her and that bothered her, and as a caretaker, especially my heart goes out, I do hand over heart a lot. You see me do this a lot, of you may see me do this a lot on social media because 2 years ago I had COVID and I almost died in the shower. And I said, hey, every time, that's why something, positive, anything, I just put my hand over my heart to remind myself that I'm still living and I'm still breathing. And so but yeah, so that type of stuff also weighs on me. But I just tell people all the time, make sure that you talk to somebody. And then I will
Mm-hmm.
say this because I cannot get off of here without saying my late wife passed away in 2017. I remarried last year. We're going on a year this year in June. And I I didn't get married till I was 37 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can honestly say that I don't know. I don't know how many men out there could say that they've been blessed to marry their best friend twice. Like
Mm-hmm.
my late wife was my best friend, and my wife now is my best friend. And we talk sports. Like right now, I'm in here, but she's in the other room watching the Rockets play in Indiana. She's a diehard Packers fan. Like she's a football fan. Like she beat me in fantasy football this year. She's not, oh, they look, I like the uniforms, or are they talking about this guy? Like, no, like I'll go, hey, what Packers Twitter saying? Like, I didn't even know that I didn't even, I know more about the NFC North almost than I know about the AFC South. And so, we travel. When I have to travel for work, she'll get a seat and sit in the arena too until it's time to go, whatever. So, I want to make sure that I, said that about her because how it ties into mental health is I have a very good support system in her.
Mm-hmm.
She supports me in everything that I do. If I tell her right now, you know what, I'm thinking that I want to start a garden, and she'll be like, okay, well, let's go to Home Depot and get you some pot and soil and all that other stuff. So I didn't mean to, serious us out, but I had to make sure that I talked about mental health, and then I talked about my support system and how good it is to have a support system.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm also a big advocate as well. So started seeing my therapist in 2019, after I actually had my oldest son, and ever since then, like, yeah, been making sure that I just keep myself level, and especially got a lot going on. 2 kids under 5, and full time job in writing and producing content. Yeah, it could get crazy real quick. So
Yes.
yeah, you got to keep it level. All right, so tell the people where they can find you on social media or where they can find your writing.
So you can find me at Big Sarge Sports with a Z at the end on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm on YouTube at Big Sarge Media and TikTok. Yeah, I ain't gonna be doing no dances though, but I am on TikTok. And you can find all my Texans content at Texans Wire. And
Awesome.
Texas Wire under Brian Bearfield. Do not go to Texas. People told me, "Hey man, I went to Texas Wire and see your article." I was like, "Cause my real name is Brian Bearfield, not Big Sarge."
Yeah, yeah, just a little bit. All right, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Megan Hall. I'm also on YouTube, so it's Real Life Blue Stories on YouTube and TikTok as well. And of course, finally, for more Colts content, head over to coltswire.usatoday.com for more stories from myself and from the staff as well. You've been listening to the Real Life Blue Stories podcast with Megan Hall.